Friends, family, and keepers of the faith, welcome to another Del Boy blog. And as always, I'm going to date stamp this. It's year 5, blog 19, or in legacy numbers, blog number 227, and it's dated the 28th of June, 2026. And yeah, I'll say it. I think it's been a difficult week for everyone. It's not about me. It's not about individuals or anything, like I normally introduce things. It's always a thing that, or a common occurrence that as Brits we talk about the weather, and you'll notice that even at the beginning of a lot of my diaries I talk about the weather. And this week it's no exception. And even today, where I look outside and it's overcast, the actual weather temperature is pretty darn hot. I was just looking, by the way, at my barometer then, and you can sort of like see the ambient temperature in this room, and there's just no respite from it in regards, to the heat. I've had real trouble this week, absolute awful trouble, because many know from the very first time I set this thing up, that I'm in a room that's about 18 foot long. It's about 9 foot wide. And every electrical device that I lived in my 3-bedroom house in Manchester all those years ago are in this environment. And although they're not all on, it's a single brick enclosure with no double glazing. At the end, in fact, it's the only room in the whole of the house that has no double glazing. And it traps heat and is incredibly cold during the winter. So summer's boiling, winter's freezing. And so of course when you sort of like are by yourself and you don't have visitors and all of that sort of stuff, and you start dwelling on things that have gone on in your week, you start to think of the things that affect you the most. And of course, heat and cold affect me. Now, heat more than cold, even though, I've had stents put in, and my blood pressure is sort of like under control, I've never really had that much of a problem with cold. In fact, when my dad died, I sort of like continued my walking, and I walked every day for 3 years straight with not a day taken off, whether regardless if it was Christmas Day, Boxing Day, birthdays, Valentine's Days, Halloween, whatever, I walked. And that meant I walked through rain, sleet, snow, heat waves, wind, the everything. And it didn't bother me. I knew that the fresh air and the keeping my mind straight was important. Sometimes I'd do it in the morning before my mother was even up. I missed that actually an awful lot. Sometimes walking in the morning with the sun rising is very beautiful. Now, things are very different in the fact that it's all about breakfasts and getting rooms ready for my mum, that I don't get that luxury anymore. And I didn't think of it as luxury back then. How many times can we actually say that to ourselves, where we say, oh, it was better back then, or, oh, I wish I could do that. But at the time, you were probably complaining about it as much as you do about everything else. So, it's one of those things. But I'm digressing a little bit here. It's been a pretty awful week, but I think I'm not alone And there's not an awful lot we could do about it. People in other countries are laughing possibly at us and going, oh, for goodness sake, we have that every day. But it's like everything. If you're not used to it, it's awful. So, I just live with the fact that, hey, another week's gone. I lived through it. Next week can only be better, or that's what the hope is always. And you just continue. So, we will get to my week a little bit later on, but it's just an acknowledgement, really, that I think about other people, all the time, and wonder, am I always in the doldrums? And know that full well that I'm not alone. You've all got your own lives. You've all got problems, health, weather, money, whatever it is, right? We've all got those issues. And I live with the fact that you just look for a better tomorrow, and live in the now if you can. So, going to get the news out of the way, and as you know, I like to just date stamp this with the news, and I really dislike the news. In fact, one thing I'm not missing by not doing so much walking is listening to just how bad the state of the world is at the moment. So, let's start this off, shall we? And one of the major world events, and I state that categorically, happened midweek after an initial blast of a story that affected me from Monday. So this happened on Wednesday. So on Wednesday, 2 earthquakes hit Venezuela within seconds of each other. The magnitude of the force was around 7.5. After 2 days, it is estimated that over 900 people have died and around 3,360 injured, with the world now trying to aid in this situation. And it's all over the news now. It's atrocious. It's awful. Venezuela is not in a great place monetary wise. I've seen pictures of Venezuela in the past and always thought it looked, in some pictures absolutely beautiful, which is what I tend to find ever since I bought a camera years ago. There is beauty even in your back garden, if you look. And, Venezuela is going. But with all of its problems, it has that beauty in it. And here they are, cash-strapped. A bloody great big earthquake. 2 of them occur within seconds. All the deaths, injuries go on, and instantly people are putting their hands up saying, I'll help. And, of course, UK was there with we're going to release 2 million in aid instantly. America are also coming up and saying, hey, we're going to be doing our bit, etc., etc. It's amazing as a world we do this, and yet we seem to be very two-faced. It's like, oh, no, I ain't gonna out you lot, all of this sort of stuff, and yet you can't fall over for somebody trying to help with something like this. It's almost like it's a PA win-win for countries, and that's a very cynical point of view. But I really do think that, if there was a volcano eruption or something that was happening, instantly the news is going to be there going, oh, and Trump said this, and UK are doing this, and all of that sort of stuff. And I'm just going, why are you not doing this every day? But money, I dare say. But we move on. So the big news story for me, as soon as I got up on Monday was that, it started off like any other day, getting my mum ready, getting her a breakfast, making the flask of tea for when my sister turns up, signing into my laptop, starting off just like I said I was going to do, which was do training. And all over the news, Keir Starmer has walked out of number 10 and stated that he is resigning as Prime Minister. And instantly all over the news, that's all it was. It filled up the BBC, it filled up ITV, it filled up, I dare say, probably quite a big news story for the world. All of this, it's the shortest tenure as a Prime Minister in regards to the Labour Party. How many Labour leaders have we had in the last so many years? What does this all mean in regards to politics in general, etc., etc.? And of course, at work, an email came through for us to discuss this because I work for the Ministry of Justice. So, of course, this is quite a big news event, and therefore will have effects later on, if not now. As soon as that was announced, there was the news story that I said last week about Andy Burnham. He was the person who won the local elections in Manchester the week before. He was actually going down that day to be sworn in as an MP and was on the train. And of course, all the cameras were following him because he was coming down to London. And there was all pure speculation on, I wonder if he's going to go now for the leadership challenge. And of course, by the time he got to London, he was sworn in and said, yeah, I am. So there you are. So as I've put, Keir Starmer resigned on Monday as PM, with Andy Burnham being sworn in as MP on the same day and announcing his interest in the PM job. That was all Monday. You could not move for the radio, the internet, TV, everywhere. And there I was, just trying to get through the day with training, and the fact that the heat on that day was really now starting to ramp up. So after that, we talk about the heat. So here we go. I've put it, marked it a little bit down on the news. Heat wave, which started late last week, continued all week, causing issues. Schools closed and travel was disrupted, with temperatures to drop from tomorrow. So yeah, the temperatures today are a little bit lower, about 2 or 3 degrees, which is welcomed. It's still warm in here with my computer on and my 2 monitors and all of that sort of stuff. And I've had to try and sort of like get through it. The real difficulty with it all is that this is a wooden desk. It's baking hot in here. Your arms sweat against the wood, leaving watermarks. I'm then getting a towel or a tea towel and drying that down and continuing to work, and then walking as best as I can outside just to get a bit of breeze, and then coming back in. And this week was important for me to try and get some ServiceNow training done, so I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But the heat caused all sorts of problems, and I think the worst day for me, would have probably have been Thursday. Tuesday to Thursday was exceptionally bad. Thursday, I think, was probably the pinnacle for me. I just couldn't concentrate at all Thursday. It really was bad. But people, like as I said, will be laughing at it and going, "Oh, we have this every day, but we don't have air conditioning in our houses much. And for me, it was, why am I worrying about me when I've got my mum in bed, can't move very much? And the heat must be atrocious. And we've got to start thinking about food and all that sort of stuff. So we'll get to that bit when we get a little bit later on. And the last bit is just sport, really, because there's a lot of sport going on, and it's going to ramp up because rugby is just about to start, Wimbledon is just about to start, and what's happened this week, the darts in America started and ended, but as you know, the World Cup has been on for the last couple of weeks. So here we are in a sort of like little nutshell. England won their World Cup group. Yeah, they got 7 points out of a possible 9. Scotland failed to secure a place beyond the group stages, which was very, very sad because I'd been following Scotland at the same time as I was England. Their first game I was so happy with. The second game I was astonished. It was like there was this goal that happened within a minute and a half, less than that. And that, I think, was the death toll, really, when you consider that the next game they had to play was against Brazil, 5 times world champions of the World Cup. And, they went out with so much gusto, but couldn't help but lose, 3-0. So they lost 2 games, won 1 game. But it meant that they were still third in their group stages. And everybody was having their fingers crossed, because the very point of it is that third in a table allows you to go forward depending on how many points and what goal difference you've got in all the other groups that are going on. So, of course, what had to happen is that certain results needed to happen, like Ghana needed to beat Croatia, say, by at least 3 goals and all of this going on. And it was just, the more you looked at it, you went, there's hope, but really, when you think about it, you just go, that ain't going to happen. And lo and behold, there I was watching the England game last night, and I was looking and seeing what the other game was going on, and the inevitable occurred at the end of the England game, and they said Scotland are now out. But it was also deemed with stemmed with something else, which was very sad, and that is the manager of Scotland, Steve Clarke, who had got them to the point of getting to the World Cup in, 28 years? First time in 28 years, something like that. He resigned. Turned around and said, that's it, about enough, off. And, I was listening to some of the commentary at the end of the England game where they were saying, well, Scotland are like this and they've got no exciting players and all of this. And I was going, bloody hell, these players that are now commentators, they never learn. They know where the money is in the game. They know, where the benefit of, where this money in training goes, that is the reason why, certain countries do not get beyond certain stages. And do we help? No. I was, even though I've got a few friends that are Scottish, and they were all going, I'm going to be watching the Scotland game, and I'm not really an England supporter and all that. I was a supporter when Scotland were playing. And there was no doubts in my mind. I thought, do you know what? I'm probably going to be more entertained watching Scotland play than I am ever watching England play. And that lo and behold, I was. I felt for them every time a goal went in. I felt elated when a goal went in for them, where they scored. So, it was just so sad to hear that. Now, at this, like I say, at the same time this is going on, the darts was going on, and Luke Humphries, the number 2 world player, retained his crown for the American darts that was being played at Madison Square Gardens the same week as all the football was going on. And I just thought to myself, it's sold out, but it must be really quite hard for the Americans to watch the darts, because in the very first day you've got, you know, UK type players or European players playing against the American players, and after the end of the first day there was only one American or Canadian dart player going into the second day. They were all knocked out quite convincingly, apart from about 2, I think. But it was so entertaining to watch, and I just thought to myself, it must be really awful for the Americans to then be going to that second day to cheer on one player, and it was then going to therefore be very unlikely that that one player was going to become champ at the end of it. But my mum loved it, and we were loving it. I was looking at it with my mum as well, and just in awe at it. Really, it was probably the most entertaining sport thing that was going on all week. You know, it was cringe-worthy to watch England. I was, even last night, I remember the game that we played against Ghana was atrocious. You know, it was a draw, 0-0. And every time I saw an England person with the ball, you know, Ghana had four people around that player. I mean, you know, there was no chance that the player was going to be able to pass it, do a strike at the goal, nothing. Because there was 4 around them every single time. They must have ran around ragged, you know, and all they did is just hold up everything. So unlike the first game, which was against Croatia, where England won 4-2. So I was watching the game with my mum last night, and it was on late at night. And this is another difficulty that I've got, is the later that my mother is up, you know, the later I am, therefore going to bed. And that means the earlier I've got to get up, and I'm tired and everything else. But my mum watched a first half that ended 0-0. And at 33 minutes, I was saying to my mum, what do you think of it then, Mum? She said, awful. In fact, I want to go to bed, you know, even though she's in bed. And I went, I totally get it, Mum. We'll watch the end of the first half then, and then I'll get everything all ready for you to go to sleep, and I'll go into my room and I'll see you tomorrow morning. And, of course, lo and behold, England do their best work in the second half. And my mum hasn't even seen any of it. So it was like the very first game. It ended up 2-2. So my mum only ever saw draws. It was 2-2, 0-0, 0-0. That's what she saw for the whole of England, other than me showing her the second half the following day, generally. And most of that was highlight stuff. So, you know, it wasn't like she was watching the whole of the second half. So, yeah, for my mum, Snorefest. So that's the sport, and there we are with the end of the news. And then we'll get to me, which is always me, work, mum. And when it comes to me, I've pretty much said my week. But we'll start off with work then. And like I say, it's been okay. You know, I can't fault work. There's nothing really going on, apart from the fact that I was supposed to be having meetings, and every time the meeting came up, it was that's cancelled or something else was going on. Probably to be expected with the news of Keir Starmer on the Monday. But it didn't help with the fact that I need to partake information to the managers to say what's going on with my mum in case it has an effect on work. As it was, heat was the thing that was causing me distress. And it was very hard to do the training. Now, what I did manage to do, and remember, I'm starting this training from scratch, even though I've done it before, was that I wanted to get to the end of this training so that I was at the same level as my colleagues starting the following week. And what it was, each of this training was separated into chapters. And, there was chapter 1, which was separated into 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and then it went to 2, 2.1, 2.2, and so forth. And I looked, and it goes all the way to 9. Now, by the end of Friday, it's very disappointing to know this, but I got to chapter 8 of 9. And you could probably turn around and go, do you know what? With that heat, that ain't bad. But I set myself a goal and I didn't meet it. So, of course, slightly deflated. But I know that there isn't much for me to do, hopefully. And, because I don't know how big the chapter is. I haven't looked that far ahead. But, that was going on. Plus, the heat was going on in this room. Plus my back issues with the tablets that I take. So I was really, really suffering this week. But like I say, I think everybody was suffering this week. So nothing new sort of like there. When it comes to myself, trying to do the best I can with tablets, I've took less and less gabapentin, around about the same cocodamol, and most of that was based on keeping the pain under control when I'm looking after my mum, which is very, very difficult with the heat. Now, anybody that's sort of like been following is that we do have a small air conditioning unit that I showed a picture of, I think, a couple of weeks ago. That's been permanently in my mum's room. I've been filling it with water, keeping that on, and it's been a heat wave in here. The only time I've took that air conditioning away was when my mum went to sleep. I would bring the air conditioner in here, turn it on for an hour to cool the room down, and then try and sleep. And that really did help. Really did help with sleeping. Even though the temperatures dropped, they were still in the 80s in here for trying to get to sleep. And it's not so much the heat, but the dry air. It's so dry. Speaking of dry look, I haven't had a drink from this yet since we started this. So my week, along with how Keir Starmer's resignation affects how I work, the training, the heat, the everything else, it really was a struggle this week. So then we get to Mum, and for Mum, it's been probably the thing that's been on my mind the most. My mother had been coughing an awful lot. We agreed, my sister and I, to call the doctor, and we did so on the Monday, and someone came out on Tuesday. We told them that the antibiotics that they gave us ran out a week ago, and it was getting worse. And they noted on Tuesday that a different antibiotic was probably required. They called it a crackle. On the lungs, you could hear a crackle. So we got another set of antibiotics that I needed to walk down and get. Sod's law that the prescription for it was not available until my sister had gone. They shut at 6 o'clock. The phone call came through at 5:05. My sister left at 10 to 5. Sod's law, isn't it? So I had to go to my next door neighbour and say, do you mind if you could just look after my mum? I won't walk. I'll go in my car. I need to go and get this prescription. And of course, it really hits you in the fact that, of course, there's air conditioning in my car, isn't there? Didn't think about that. So I put the air conditioning on. I went, this is the best all week. Anyway, got there, had to wait for the prescription to be readied up. Got back, thanked my next door neighbour, who was a godsend for me, and then had to get into the swing of things in regards to getting my mum her tea, giving her her medicine, what we're going to be watching in the evening, getting everything ready for tomorrow, all an hour later because, of course, I had to go down and get the prescription. So everything's moved on an hour. So that was a headache. On top of the nurse doing that, she noticed that although the breathing was the concern, there was a skipping of a heartbeat. So another nurse came out on Wednesday and they brought a portable ECG machine. Now, this is where a little bit of knowledge can be terrible and a lot of knowledge can be terrible, but it can also be a benefit. There's never any great way about this. The lady came in and, she noted there was a skip and then she did an ECG and she took photographs and got a tablet out and sent these on and said that she'd be calling back and recognising both my sister's number and my own telephone number as ways to get in touch with us. And my sister leaving very distressed as I was. She didn't seem like there was any good news. It seemed bad news. It was like her face was po-faced, very non-emotional. And she said things like, I don't read the ECGs. They're sent on. They're looked at by somebody else. So the only thing that happened that evening was my sister did turn around and say that the ECG might not be as bad as it seems because she's been poorly anyway and she's only just started on the new antibiotics. Fair enough. But it doesn't get over the fact that, is that the case? Because we're not going to have another ECG. We just have to give her the medicine and hope for the best. We don't go around measuring her pulse or anything. Blood pressure we can do, ear temperature, taking the temperature of all of that, but not ECGs. So, of course, we're still not in a great situation, even when they turned around and said, it's probably because she's not very well. And then the whole of the rest of the week has been about keeping the heat down, giving her her medicine, keeping my mum as entertained as possible, and just trying to talk to each other about what all this might mean. And, this is where you pull together a little bit and, you do what you can. So I know that I tried to say to my sister, try not to worry, knowing that doesn't matter. You'll still worry regardless. But I also feel that sometimes that's really helped me when in the past somebody's spoken to me and said, don't worry about these things. You've got the best care that's going on, like say with my heart attack. I did feel better when a doctor or a nurse was telling me, oh, you're in the best of hands. We do this all the time, all of this sort of stuff. It really does help. So I hope that would be the same for my sister, even though I know she won't be thinking about that. But I've got to try, haven't I? Got to try. So when it comes to my mum, it's been a horrendous week. And the strain and the stress has got to me. It's got to my sister. We've had nurses out. We've got new medication. And then when it comes to personal work and myself, things continue the way that they are. And, and work is rapidly changing. So, yeah, I can't turn around and say an optimistical week, a better week, a good week. It's got to be listed as, poor, I suppose. But that really does end where things are with me in regards to personal. Nothing else to say other than I'm just going to keep trying and just hope that next week is a better week. We're now into the second week of giving my mum her antibiotics. We're on the second bottle of 2. And, you just do everything that you can, don't you? So we're going to move on now, or should I say just shortly into the shout-outs. I'm just going to go and wet my face, have a bit of water. And then we'll get to the meat and potatoes of this diary. So, won't be a moment. And I'm back, and I won't shy away from sort of like stating that possibly about half an hour has gone by, because basically I needed some water and all of that sort of stuff. I needed just to cool down a little bit. But as soon as I sort of like said, oh, I need to sit back down, I feel exactly the same temperature as I was when I went away. So I don't feel any benefit, if you see what I mean. But regardless of that, this is always a fun thing to do for me on a Sunday. So, so I won't tell a lie. I'm really quite happy to be sitting back in front of a camera again. But anyway, we've got past sort of like my week. The only thing I sort of like haven't really talked about when it comes to the sort of like the challenges is that although I talked briefly about the room, 18 foot by 9 single brick heat thing, it goes back to a sort of like an interlocking side to the kitchen, which goes back to the garage, which is at the front. And the garage is even worse. It's sort of like filled with a lot of my stuff from the house, but also my mum's stuff, my dad's stuff, all of that sort of stuff. But it's made of those big concrete blocks. And it's got a flat tarmacked roof, felt tarmac. And inside there is the washing machine and the dryer. And that means that with the washing machine and the dryer used as much as they are at the moment, because we're washing constantly my mother's bed sheets, clothes, the pajamas, towels, tea towels, flannels, the works, along with my own cleaning regime. It's bloody hot in there because it's not a convex dryer. It's boiling. And therefore there's no cold air that you could even get drafted through the garage through to here. So some people might have been thinking, surely that there's a cold area in your house, but it's not. It really is that bad. And I hate to think what it would be like in the attic. I need to think about that because I don't go upstairs very much anymore with my back and my legs. So that, opening that escape at the roof is something I probably really need to do. So that's something else I've got to think about. So yeah, that's another challenge is what I want to say. But let's get to the shout outs, because as I said, I thank everybody that's ever sort of like watched this diary, and especially the people that leave a comment. These mostly are people that I interact with, not all. And, from that point of view, it's very fun for me on a Sunday to say, oh, I wonder what they're going to say. Most of the comments will come in during the week. I won't look at them other than to leave a heart and say heart left to keep the comment. And I leave it to the surprise on the Sunday. Not always is that the case, because sometimes it's an impossibility because of comments that have disappeared in the past. But very, very early on, it was 100%. I've not read any of this. And like I say, for the most part, I don't. So it's still going to be quite a bit of a surprise for me. And just want to say, like I say, thank you to anybody that's watching. But here's the people that have commented this week. They are Down the Rabbit Hole, Martroid, Ian Hill, The Ramblings, Muckman Movies, Colin Jones, aka Ponder, Roberts Retro Gaming, and Wee Bob Art. And a special mention to Steve Still Plays Games, because as I mentioned last week, I didn't realise that he took a photograph of the comment that disappeared last week, so I can read it out this week. I'll do the very best I can to answer the question on it, although I might not be particularly good at that, but I'll do what I can. And like I say, it's a very interesting time because with so much sort of like pausing and so forth, I always tend to spot something after I've uploaded it and then have to upload it again. So it generally sort of like settles down. But with looking after my mother and the little time that I've got to record this, sometimes the recording goes up quite late on Sunday. But I do the best I can. So thank you very much for all bearing with me. So I'm going to just go straight into the comments. They're not in any particular order. And the first one is from Down the Rabbit Hole. And he's put, loving the blog as always, Del. Good introspection of those songs and the background behind Ray Charles. I guess this speaks to how music speaks to us. And to quote Elton John, sad songs say so much, he knows me so well. Elton John, he's mentioned there. You mentioned John Romita. I do all the time, to be quite honest. And my brother is a huge fan of classic Spider-Man comics of the 70s. I once asked him who was that guy before Todd McFarlane became so famous. He said John Romita, and as soon as I checked images online, I was flooded with Spider-Man nostalgia, because you're right, he truly was the artist for our friendly neighbourhood web slinger of our youth. Yes, very much so. And although Steve Ditko, quite rightly did the very first 38 issues and was also doing Doctor Strange at the same time, and a load of other sort of like Strange Tales type stuff, those Tales to Astonish and all those lovely stories that we used to love, those little 3 or 4 page twist at the sort of like Twilight Zone comics, really. Spider-Man was my thing because my dad bought me the UK branded ones, and it was very difficult to get the American comics. They came over here as ballast on boats generally, and you certain news agents would have what they call spinner racks, spinner racks, and sometimes I'd get the odd American comic, and not necessarily would it be Marvel, it could be DC, but I was always pleased to get them because they were in colour, and UK stuff generally was in black and white or two-tone. So I'm digressing a little bit, but when those reprints came out over here after the run of Steve Ditko, there was a huge chunk of John Romita stuff came through. And every time I went into a toy store and there happened to be some toys based around Marvel Comics, it would have artwork that I would instantly recognize, and it would be John Romita. He did a lot of the marketing sort of like images. They were on lunch boxes, flasks, cards that held your dinky toys and stuff. If they were Marvel, John Romita probably had a play in it. And later on, I found after he left the comic Spider-Man, which was after a number of years, he kept to doing covers mostly rather than doing a whole comic, and became art director, which meant that young upcoming artists would learn from him, and he would also do corrections into what they called the Marvel method. So I always thought to myself, does that mean that he wasn't a nice guy because he's correcting artwork? If you've ever written something, and your school teacher came along and underlined it, went, change that, all this sort of stuff. Critiquing is not great, especially if they're redesigning. He's totally redrawn that face. What the hell's he doing? But apparently he was quite well liked, so that's quite good. But I can imagine, what it was like, for certain egos I suppose is the word. So anyway, that's sort of like a little bit more about John Romita that you want to know from me. You continue. So also mentioned the idea of attending conventions, and I just attended a retro gaming one here in Vancouver. I was astounded to see a couple of Wii games I own that have increased in value multiple times over. Has that ever occurred to you? Something you bought for cheap mysteriously became incredibly popular, and now that thing on your shelf is hugely valued in the collecting community. It's funny you should say that, really. I don't really think about things on shelves because I haven't got any. It was just one of those rules that my mum and dad had, that when I moved into this room that I couldn't drill into the walls and all of that sort of stuff, which is why you find sellotape and marks and stuff on that. And it's very difficult, you know, to not have, you know, to keep buying furniture that is like bookshelves that stand upright, you know, that can't be drilled into the walls. And I still keep to that now, because I don't think my mother would change her mind in this not being my house. So, of course, I keep to that belief. But, you know, it is one of those things where, of course, my mum loved me, and I'm pretty sure if I did that, I had have asked her, she would have said, oh, yeah, that was years back. But it never cropped up. Conversation never cropped up. I just lived with the fact that things were put in crates. So it's just one of those things. But yeah, so I don't think about things on shelves, but I do think about things that were of value. I remember when my dad was working at General Foods, later called Kraft General Foods, and then called Kraft Jacob Suchard and all of that sort of stuff. Because he worked as a forklift driver, and he was also a union rep. He was the union rep for people who worked at the factory. He had the ability to go to the shop, and in that shop you could buy copious amounts of Mellow Bird's coffee and stuff like this, Bird's custard and stuff. But they had a duty to make sure that he was protected, you know, working in the forklift truck and so forth. So he had the ability to be able to buy very, very cheaply steel cap shoes and donkey jackets. Now, this was something that I've only just actually thought about. But yeah, there was a lot of people that worked in the factory in my hometown. And certain people, you know, that were friends of mine and in my same year wore donkey jackets. And I suppose if I'd have looked further down, I would have probably have seen that they had steel toe cap shoes. Now, my dad did get me some, but I always found them heavy and cumbersome and sweaty and all that sort of stuff. But the donkey jackets were really, really warm. I mean, they were really bulky, and they had sort of like that plastic sort of like patch over the shoulders and on the elbows and all of that sort of stuff. And these days, if you want to buy steel toe cap shoes and you want to buy donkey jackets, they cost a fortune. And I thought to myself, wow, could have bought some of them. Wow, yeah. Because he was able to buy them several times a year. And not necessarily would he put on the newest ones. He'd wear the old ones out. And, you know, these steel toe caps would last 2 or 3 years. But by then, he'd have bought 5, 6, 7 pairs. So, you know, they could still be in their boxes, you know, being sold. eBay, they fetch a fair bit of money. So you've put something you bought cheap mysteriously becomes incredibly popular. Well, comics and trading cards, they're always going to be speculation. But there are comics. I mean, I don't know if I've got one under here I can show. Yeah, I've shown this one lots of times. So there's a comic that cost 7D, so this is before decimalization, think the year can be seen there. That must be probably worth a little bit, but it's a reprint, so it's not worth that much. But they came with free gifts. Now, if you've still got the comic, okay, and you've got the free gift as well, I think they're worth quite a bit of money, even as a reprint. And it always used to make me laugh, because when the comic industry really did blow up, there were people on the stock market that never read a comic, or hadn't read a comic in years and years and years, suddenly started buying #1 issues of comics and thinking, oh, I'm going to store this away, and in 30 years' time it's going to get my son that's not even been born yet through college. Well, back then, #1 issues were printed in millions. Anybody that knows comics knows that the second issue is probably half the number printed of the very first issue, and then it drops to the figures from what you would see in a standard comic as the figures steadied out to the regular comic community. So, of course, the most expensive and the ones that are worth the most are the ones with the lowest print runs. So, of course, all these people have got, that, like on that wall, there's the Todd McFarlane famous cover, okay, from the aforementioned Spider-Man #1. It came out with variant covers. There was a gold one, there was a black one, there was a green one, a glow-in-the-dark one, all of these. And they're worth the same amount of money as when you bought them back then, because everybody was buying them, thinking that they were going to be worth the same as Superman from the 1940s. Don't be silly. It's modern printing and cupulous amounts of numbers publishing these. So even now, it seems that Marvel are able to do this trick, and DC as well, and all the other comic industries, of rebooting a comic to a #1 issue again to get people to buy a comic and to entice new collectors. Doesn't work. You'd be much better off going to specialist comic stores, flea markets, all of that sort of stuff, and seeing what you can buy of the old regime. You get much more enjoyment as well, and looking at that old beat-up comic just adds that charm. I'll never cease to not love going up to my old short and long boxes and looking at comics from the 1960s and 70s that I've got up in my collection, pulling them out of their poly bag and reading very carefully, smelling that paper that's old now. That's great. But trading cards and all of that sort of stuff, there are certain short runs or misprints that are worth a fortune. But of course, I think one thing that I have got in my collection, I have got a camera. It's an Olympus AZ300, I think it is. That was my very first expensive camera, which didn't have bolt-on lenses. It wasn't a DSLR or digital. It used proper film. But it had a zoom lens, that came out of its body. And this was back in 1985, 6. That's probably worth some money now because it still uses film. And I've still got the box. Yes, I've still got the box. I know I've got the box. That's probably worth some money. But I think I've mentioned some things there that, obviously are probably worth some money. But it's the categories, I think, that just show things off, because, like I say, clothes, shoes, comics, records, vinyl, all of that sort of stuff bought for pennies, worth fortunes. But you've got to be in a really unique situation to have that in mint, you know, as if you'd never played the damn thing and it was still in its cellophane and all of that sort of stuff. I think we've all seen the film The 40-Year-Old Virgin, where Steve Carell is got all those action figures, you know, Steve Austin still in box, you know, and he turned around and said, oh no, it's his boss that's worth the money. Well, yeah, because no bugger bought it. Everybody wanted the Bionic Man, didn't they? So that just goes to show you what you got to think about if you ever want to be savvy in this collection era. So I hope that sort of like helped a little bit with some of my thoughts on this. Salute, my friend, and by the way, your name will crop up a little bit later on. I did watch that video of you at that convention. So we'll move on. We'll get to my friend Martroyd. What's he put? He's put, I really enjoyed your little talk on Ray Charles. Del, it reminded me just how extraordinary he was as a musician and arranger, not just as a singer. I have a Rhino compilation of his 1950s recordings, and it's an absolute showcase of his talents. The way he blended gospel, blues, jazz and R&B is simply brilliant, and the musicianship throughout is phenomenal. Just awesome stuff. Some of the most soulful and innovative music ever recorded, in my humble opinion. And thank you so much for sharing that with me, Martroyd. It's funny that you mentioned the Rhino recordings. If I remember rightly, it's a 5-disc set, and it's got country music on it, a lot of country music on it, and it came out in 1998 because I bought it in, I think, 2006, and I had to get it from America. And because I've been, you know, I was talking about Ray Charles last week, I was watching an awful lot on YouTube, and I think he did a radio interview at the time that compilation was being marketed, and he was talking about the choices that were on there, and about his you know, how his past, you know, how he'd grown up and what it was like living and all of that sort of stuff in that particular era. So fantastic that you've got that compilation. If it's the same compilation, you and I have got the same recordings. Absolutely marvelous. Might show it off next time, because I'd have to try and find it amongst that clutter that you see week on, week out. But absolutely fantastic, and thank you. I love it when people share a little memory with me. Absolutely marvelous. So salute, my friend, and long may you be around and commenting. But we move to my friend Wee Bob Art. Let's see what he's got to say. As you know, he's got a channel, just like Down the Rabbit Hole has, and he did a recent montage of him painting his room, which is now considered to be his movie watching room, and very entertaining it was too. And he's put here, a bit late, so apparently this one is probably one that's been left last night or this morning. A bit late, but hope you and family are well. I did watch along earlier this week, but I didn't comment. Anyway, I will just go to my question for this time, if you see this in time. If not, don't worry. The question is, I bought a steelbook of the Running Man, the Arnold version. The image made it look like there were lots of things that came with it, but it's not the case. I'm sure you have this steelbook and have done a video on it. Are there any items you have bought that looked amazing in the image, but when you received them, you were a bit disappointed? All the best wishes. Do you know what? It's made me think. Let me have a quick look. Speak amongst yourselves. I think I've got the Running Man. Yes. Found it quite quickly. here we go. I didn't want to spend too much time, but I thought I knew where it was. So I think he's talking about this one. It's a steelbook, The Running Man. It's the 30th anniversary. Believe it or not, it's a slipcase steelbook. You don't really get too many of those. So I'll show it all together, look. So there you are, the slipcase, which is quite glossy, quite nice on the back, all of that. But when you lift it out, it's this. You get this steelbook, but again, glossy, with just a single picture on the back. And there it is all together again, but there it is slid up, look, so you can see. So I see what you're saying. You're saying here, it seemed like you were getting more. But it's not actually really the case. I think that's the one that you're talking about. Anyway, there might be another revision of it, and I might even have that as well. But have I bought something... Have I bought that looked amazing in the image, but when you received them, you were a bit disappointed? Ooh, I suppose I have. But this is sort of very similar, by the way, to Down the Rabbit Hole, in the fact that there's a lot of physical media stuff that comes out in deluxe packaging. And when you open it up, you've got lobby cards, posters, a case, the discs printed. And when you look at what the standard release is, you realise, what? So I've spent 25 extra pounds or dollars for a piece of cardboard with some picture cards and a poster. Am I mad or what? And even when it comes to steelbooks, why are steelbooks £10 or $10 more than the standard release? Just because it's made of metal. The image, half the time, are so uninspired, unlike at the very beginning when we were buying steelbooks in the 2020s. They were so much more innovative, with bezels and deboss and so forth. So, yeah, it's very disappointing. That for definite. But then I think about it and I go, film posters. Aren't they the worst? You go to the cinema and there's a picture, right? And it's some space image or something with a load of the actors' heads all going around. Laser battles going on in the background and all this sort of stuff. And when you're going to see the film, bugger all going on. Where are the old posters? Like we Bobber will appreciate this. Like Jaws, great big Jaws head going like that, a swimmer along the top, told you everything, right? And got you excited, right? And it was drawn, painted, whatever, right? Not this montage, photoshopped heads or space laser images and all that sort of stuff, right? So that's disappointing, isn't it? Because it seems to be sort of like saying to you, this is the thing. And then when you go in, it's like, what a piece of shit that was. Excuse my French, but, I have to say a little bit with this. And going back to those comic days when I was talking about Down the Rabbit Hole, I remember when there was a big hoo-ha. Yeah, right, it was. Two big things occurred. Batman broke his back against someone called Bane. And of course, that tale is told in the films, the third film that came out with Christopher Nolan. But also there was the death of Superman. Now, it's not the first time Superman had been killed, right? There was this one issue that a lot of people don't remember that was from the 50s, where they told this one-off tale. And it was all a dream or something, right? But in this particular year, they killed off Superman. And it rose to the rise of the Supermen. And then Superman came back. inevitably. But it came out at a time where the comic was polybagged, right? You could not see what the cover looked like. It was polybagged, black, Superman symbol, dripping blood. That's it. And inside there was the comic and possibly something else, like a poster or a trading card or whatever it was. The industry kept the speculation up. Polybags are the worst. Marvel are doing it now. They're calling it the 616 blind purchase, right? So 616 referring to the Earth that Marvel Universe is set in, 616. And it's a polybagged bag with 2 comics in it. One which could possibly have a variant cover that you could only get in the poly bag with a facsimile edition of an old comic. And it costs you $15, right? Now, comics are any price. They could be $2 to $3 up to, variant covers could be $50, $60 or more. But the standard, this standard comic book is actually about the price of about $4, and the facsimile $2. So you're spending $15 for something that's not worth more than $6. And there is also a face mask in there of Doctor Doom. Now, you open the bag up, you pull it out, and you see whether you've got the standard, any edition that you can get on the newsstand, and the facsimile that comes as a bonus. This guy spent $50. 45. But with taxes, I suppose it's 50. Opened up 3 of these bags, and every single one did not have a variant in it. And he could have just spent $6, so that's $6 to $18 and got the same thing. Crap. Now, I suppose there's one way of looking at it. He could have bought 3, opened 1 and kept the other 2 sealed to sell later on. Who knew what would be in it? It'd be to the person that bought it, wouldn't it, on eBay? But even so, they're called blind bags, and it's a bad thing because it just gets people like me, collectors, up in arms with publishers because you've lost touch with what the collector wants. So that's a bad thing because obviously your expectations are high and you get a lot of rubbish. So there's one thing there. Toys and Airfix models. Gotta be one. I've said it last week. I love the artistry that are on these Airfix boxes, right? When you opened up the box, you saw a load of plastic that was all one colour, grey usually. And you had to Airfix it together, and you'd be using super glue or whatever it is. The glue would get over the top and you had to sand that down, or, try to use a matchstick to do it. And it looked nothing like the bloody picture. And, you had to be a really good artist, with those enamel paints to get it looking anything like good. So I was very disappointed, wasn't I, as a kid? Oh, that tank looks brilliant. Gran, can you buy me that? Can you buy me that tank? I want to get it home. And then she'd have to then buy the glue because I wouldn't be able to do anything with it. And then next week I might be asking for the paint or something, right? And I'd get it home and open it up and I'd be looking at the instructions and all of that sort of stuff. What would happen? Look nothing like it. I could never get it looking. The only thing that made it look remotely like it was those water decals that you put in water and you slid off and put it onto the plastic and you'd get wrinkles, and all of that sort of stuff. So, yeah, that wasn't good. And I suppose the other one is that later on in life, I've bought things like statues and action figures. I mean, you must have seen it yourself, wee Bob. You've bought an action figure. It says that you can see through his eye. You press the button in his back and he lifts an engine, with his arm and all of this sort of stuff. When you got it home, it looked nothing like Steve Austin, and the bionics were covered in a piece of plastic or rubber. The eyepiece, you couldn't see through it. If you did, you couldn't make anything out because it was that solid plastic that went through the head. Evel Knievel, you know, another one with bike. You know, the wind-up part broke before the bloody bike did. And that was then useless because you needed that wind-up to make it go forward. But we're totally convinced now that when we're buying a statue or something and it costs an awful lot of money, it's going to look like the box. But what we have to understand, to give statues a little bit of credence here, those are hand-painted porcelain statues. Not every single one is unique. There will be imperfections. And the amount of people that don't recognise that, assemble it and send it back saying, looks nothing like it, or there are blemishes, or there is a scratch, or the lines are not straight on this. It's bloody, it's sculpted to 750 individual items, hand painted, probably in a Korean factory somewhere, right? What do you expect? You know, it's that sort of thing. But it is a disappointment. I do get it. You spent $1,000 on something, you get it, and it's got chips or something on it. Yeah, I get it. And I just want to go back to Wee Baba, actually, and just say, oh, by the way, thanks very much, Wee Baba. What a fantastic question. Very similar, though, but I really did enjoy answering that and sort of like expanding a little bit more. But just before, Down the Rabbit Hole said, is there something that I've bought cheap that mysteriously is worth more money now? I'll just go back to my other camera here. There we go. Now that picture that's on that wall is a Spider-Man versus Green Goblin lithogram poster, right? Now I bought that poster. I've still got that tube, by the way. It cost me $50. Now, it's in a frame. It's, I mean, I don't know if I can do this on camera, but if I was to get my phone up, yeah, this phone, I'll get this phone, right? And I'll take a picture of it on my wall. Right? Bought it for $50. Somebody is selling one on eBay at the moment. It came out in 1995. It is now $838.80. So approximately £650. You can see the image. I can go through them. There's the signatures. Look, Alex Ross, John Romita. You can see it's signed limited edition with the, and you can see it's actually on lithogram. You can see the rough cutting where they did it. There was only so many that were made. Okay. So if I then go to here, and if I can bring up the gallery, there is my picture on the wall. Oh, hang on. And you can see I've got that on the wall. You can't see it very well, but you can see it's the same image. All right. But yeah, who knew that's how much that's worth? So just to give you that was just to give you a bit of a flavour. I forgot that I looked that up. So thank you, Down the Rabbit Hole, again, and thank you, Wee Bob Art. Salute to you both. And hope that's answered that. And we'll go on to Ian Hill, The Ramblings. Brilliant bloke. You know that I do my live with him on a Wednesday. And we had a great time. It was a very hot day, so I'm glad that we weren't there for too long. I needed to get some sleep. I had not had a lot of sleep this week. And I also wanted to watch the Scotland game. So I did ask him if it's at all possible, could we end early? And we managed to get through all the comments. We all had a great time. So that was wonderful. That was by my request, by the way. And let's see what Ian's put. He's put, "Hi, Del Boy. Hope you and your mum are keeping as cool as you can and drinking lots of water, keeping the hydration going. I always remember the ones who thought that they were clever trying to fry eggs on pavements. I always thought if they did succeed, there's no way I would eat it. Yuck, all those germs." Yeah, it's enough to boil an egg. You know what I mean? We've all had that. Fry an egg on. Yeah. For a short time, I did start to feel unwell. I just couldn't get comfortable and even felt dizzy. I did come out of it and made sure I kept drinking. I've been watching the football, but maybe not as much as I thought I would. Still looking forward to the next England match on Saturday, well, which we've just had. Not watched as many films this week, but my highlight was Final Destination Bloodline, a 2025 film, which I've got on Steelbook. It was much better than I thought it would be. It was also a farewell to Tony Todd, who was dying of cancer. His last scene was improvised and very touching. This franchise continues, and another film is due out next year. Can you tell me any film franchises that continue regardless and you still could enjoy? All the best wishes to you and your mum, and have a reet grand time. Wow, what a great question, actually, because some people don't like that word franchise as well, which it is, or intellectual property, as I usually call it, IP, just because I've been saying that for years rather than saying franchise. No other reason. Same thing. It's a series. It's a franchise. But I would have said years ago Bond, but I don't watch. I don't enjoy my time with James Bond anymore. So can't really say that. And of course, a lot of films are eking themselves out a little bit, like Halloween. Saw's not that bad. Some overstayed their welcome a little bit. Maybe Freddy Krueger did to an extent. Friday the 13th to an extent. Although, saying that, still great enjoyment with those. But if I was to talk about films that I liked back then, and I still have an enjoyment, Planet of the Apes comes to mind. Because I saw that, very early on, even though it's a 1968 film. I saw it in the 70s. They've rebooted it, and I got great enjoyment watching the story unfold for Caesar in those films, even if the original Planet of the Apes was more about Taylor, the astronaut. So, it's great to look back at those and know that the new ones I'm getting enjoyment with as well. I can't really think of another one really that comes to mind. I think the closest would probably be Godzilla. Last year, a couple of years ago now, it was Godzilla -1, which I got great enjoyment of. And I always did enjoy the old ones, that I saw in the 70s. Even though it's a much, it goes back further than that. And there are going to be doing some more Godzilla films in the same mold as Godzilla -1. So that's one that I'm looking forward to. Yeah. But I can't really think, Scream and all of those sort of things, they sort of like diminished returns with each one that comes out. So I can't really say other than those two. I could have mentioned King Kong, but they've been doing these Kong and Godzilla joint films, and they're just basically milking things. What I was talking about in Godzilla, I was talking about more like the -1s of this era. So that's fantastic. And I'm just going to take another little break because I need to get some water, and I also need to see whether my mother needs changing, because it's getting close to the time where we need to change her midday through the day. So I'll be back shortly. Won't be long. And we're back, and my mum's all okay, and I just went into the garden for a moment just to see cooled down with a bit of breeze, and the cat was out there, and he walked towards me and fell at my feet so I could give him a bit of a stroke and a cuddle, and came back in, and here we are. So I think the last comment was for my friend Ian Hill, who's got a channel, and I do a live with him on Wednesday, and I think the amount of stuff he comes out with, it's very much worth your time going to have a little look. And the next one in the comment section is Colin Jones, aka Ponder. Always keeps me on track when it comes to technical things, but let's see what he's put today. So he says, glad to hear things are going okay on the home work front. Sending my regards to your mum as always, and thank you. That's greatly appreciated as always. My PCBs, that's his arcade PCBs, so far are in order of acquisition are Bombjack, Choplifter, Mr. Do and Double Dragon. Mr. Do with D-U, not D-O. I'm going to try and change Mr. Do with a U into Mr. Do with an O, fixed when I stop melting. Doesn't matter if it doesn't work, it's project and it's fully reversible. Double Dragon needs attention on the audio side, but I'm really not fussed over that one. I'll still try recapping the audio section and replacing the amp though. Yeah, Double Dragon was a strange one if I remember rightly. It had slowdown even in the arcade board, but was iconic when it came out. So yeah, brilliant. Some original soundtrack albums I do like are quite old now, include movies like The Battle of Britain, which stands out for me from my childhood. Yeah, Battle of Britain, brilliant. I mean, 633 Squadron, you know, Where Eagles Dare, all of those sort of stuff. Absolutely fantastic scores. We need another computer literacy program for politicians and company CEOs who demand shit that's just not possible with the technology, e.g. privacy and filtering at the same time. I know the little dig he's doing there, and it's spot on, really, to be quite honest. It's finally hit me. Heat fatigue. I think I've hit my limit. Can't say I'm suffering as such, but I don't want to do anything except spend time in the pool. So my question for you this week is, what are your tactics for dealing with the hot weather? Wish I had one, and if I knew what one that worked, I'd be doing it. But it's literally been keeping a towel close to me, dabbing my face with water, ice cubes constantly on the go, you know, going outside for a bit of a breeze if there is any, and just making sure really that my mother is comfortable. That's what was important. Not so much about me, even though I know it's equally important, but I just feel no, that's the important thing. And there's just been a knock at the door, so I'll be back in just a moment. And apologies, because I was needed to help with my mother, and that's made me feel even hotter than I am already. But that all got sorted, and it's given me time as well to put the stuff that was in the wash into the dryer. So I was reading out stuff from Colin Jones, aka Ponder, and he was talking about how I deal with the heat, and I said I wish I knew, but of course, you know, I've been going outside, splashing myself with water, all of that sort of stuff. I've changed out of my t-shirts in one day this week. I changed my t-shirt 5 times, 5 individual different t-shirts. And it's just one of those things where this particular room that I'm in at the moment does have a bathroom, but the shower's broken. It's been broken for 15 years, even longer than that. So, you know, I wash at the sink. There is a bath upstairs, but it's a deep bath, and it's very difficult for my back to get in and out of. But it's just one of those things that I've lived with, and I've basically got plenty of sort of like ways, you know, of washing, you know, and of course I've got plenty of cold water, sponges, all of that sort of stuff. So that's, you know, that's how things work. But yeah, cold water. It's funny. I never really looked into it, but my mother always turned around and said that a nice cup of hot tea cools you down. And I believe I looked into it once, and I believe it is true. Your body cools down because you're putting something in it that's warm. But I haven't looked into that research in years and years and years. But it's like those old wives' tales you hear. Like that mothers used to tell you. Like if you pull that funny face and the wind changes, your face will remain that way, and all of that. And I always used to think it was really strange that if you drank something hot, that you'd cool yourself down. I was going, hey, that's why I want an ice lolly, right? But it is apparently it is quite true. And I'm sure Colin will basically fill you in with all the background information for it for next time. But anyway, sorry it's such a poor answer. If I had the answer, I'd give it you, and I'd give it to everybody that had it. So salute, my friend. And I think it's tomorrow that your new blog will be out. So if I've got my maths right. So looking forward to that. Okay, so moving forward, we got Robert's Retro Gaming next, and he's put, hi Del, I've had a bit of time off work and I've been watching a lot of World Cup games. Of course, Canada is my team, but I am also cheering for your England and Scotland. As far as the other games go, I usually root for the underdog to at least have a good game. That's where it ends. I think he was going to come back. It's a shame, but that's fine. He's probably so engrossed with the football, so I'm really glad about that. And of course, I know exactly what he's been doing on his YouTube channel. I'll be talking about that a little bit later on. So you're definitely going to be hearing about what Robert's been up to in Canada this week. And we get to the last comment, which is from my friend Muckman Movies, Jamie. He's put, thanks for the shout out, Del Boy. I do a shout out every time he does a video. His stuff is absolutely incredible. He put, I really want to see that Game of Thrones spin-off. It sounds like it's excellent. I can tell you now it's not. It was not well received when it came out. It's a more comedy orientated Game of Thrones spin-off. Half-an-hour episodes, of which there are 6. We're not really talking House of the Dragon or Game of Thrones here, where there was at least 10 to 13 episodes of an hour long each. House of the Dragon is over, I think it's about an hour and 10 per episode. I've got it because it goes in with my Game of Thrones box sets. House of the Dragon started on Monday. The first episode was really good. I liked it an awful lot. I'm looking forward to this Monday. If I wanted to, I could watch it at 2 a.m. tonight, but I won't be. So that'll be good to see. You continue. I have a question for you. I watched Lawrence of Arabia yesterday in preparation for my top 10 60s films video. Wow, what a film. But what would you say is your favourite epic film? A film that is at least 3 hours long. And I have to say, you've chosen the best one. Lawrence of Arabia has always been my favourite film, as they call them, epics. But I've had so many. I used to watch them bank holiday, and I used to watch them with my dad. And, they just used to be always on in the living room on a bank holiday. And there would always be a family member on the settee watching one. Things that come to mind are Bridge Over the River Kwai, Dr. Zhivago, The Ten Commandments, The Greatest Story Ever Told, Spartacus, Ben-Hur. Epics of absolute, you could not turn around and say to them that they weren't epics. Cleopatra, another one. They just keep coming and coming and coming. And I watched them and loved them so much. You did say 3 hours plus, and I don't think I'm wrong in any of those. Maybe I'm wrong about The Robe or something like that. But yeah, I think Bridge Over the River Kwai might be tad under 3 hours. Not sure. But Lawrence of Arabia, what a film. Even Steven Spielberg explains as a child how he used to go into the cinema and watch that film. The perfect marriage of acting, visuals and music. You can't not think of the Lawrence of Arabia music and not think of Sand Dunes. Maurice Jarre, what a fantastic composer, and the reason probably why I like Jean-Michel Jarre so much, being as that's his son, and I loved electronic music. So a lot of heritage there for me to think about, and I dare say every film I've mentioned there is a no-brainer and has not come as any surprise to you. But like I say, they come off the tongue easily because we've all seen them, and we've probably all seen them for the same reasons, which is bank holidays times, you know, time where we had that extra Monday off, or a religious event was going on, like Christmas or whatever like that, you know. So yeah, I loved them all. I loved the war films as well, and they always tended to have great music to them. The only one that is an epic, but I haven't really seen all the way through, but I've seen it all the way through, in just not in one sitting. It's probably Gone with the Wind, which I believe is supposed to be getting a 4K release, but because of its subject matter is probably tied up in all sorts of litigation. But the others stand out far more. So thank you very much, Jamie. I'm sorry it was such a lackluster answer, but it's just that I think the ones that stand out are really, really well known. I don't think there are many obscure ones. Maybe there are, and I'm just not that thinking on all cylinders type thing. But what that does do is it gets to the end of the shout outs and the comments. So thanks very much, guys, for all of those. And we'll get to the next section, which is what I've watched on YouTube. And with the heat, you could say I've watched around about the same, but according to my phone, it says that I used my phone 2 hours less this week than the previous week. So bear that in mind. And we separate this into 3 sections. Watched on YouTube is the first one. And there are 4 in here that I religiously watch each week. That is This Week in Retro, Tech Moan, Gadget Show and Chronologically Gaming. All of those, they tend to have something that I'm going to like each week. So in This Week in Retro, we had Britannia is Saved, New IDEs for Old Machines, and Real or Sim. This sort of like is the news of the week. Britannia is Saved is about the Ultima series and the original designer. Real or Sim, I think, was about the Commodore phone, which is a question mark over whether anybody thinks that's been a good idea or not. Time will tell. But all of the stuff in there its own way was great to listen to. Tech Moan was another one of those toy recordable players that were out in the 60s. It was called Say It, Play It. And his video was called Say It, Play It and Fix It, because he ordered it, it came through, and of course it definitely would require a fix. Anybody that knows anything about tape mechanisms, even in toys, they know that they have belts. And if they were made in the 60s, those belts have perished. Motors will have seized, they'll need greasing, all sorts of stuff. No word of a lie, that's what this one was as well. Always a fun to watch those, because I like to see how those things were put together in the first place. The old sort of circuit boards that were in them, if you call them that, they were literally just drive mechanisms and motors, and black and red wires for the positive and negative of the battery compartment. That's it. So that was great. The Gadget Show had a couple of things to talk about this week. Grand Theft Auto 6 and the hottest Prime deals 2026. And that's because of 2 things have happened this week. the hottest Prime deals 2026 is because we're in 3 days of Prime deals. That's Amazon Prime. And he wanted to mention about the gadgets and so forth that are hot off the press to buy in this particular Prime Day sale, as they call it. And Grand Theft Auto is all over the news. You couldn't move for Grand Theft Auto news. It was even on News at 10. And that is that the game that's been in development now for so many years and has had so many millions put into it is finally going to be coming out in just under a year's time. And it's gone the way I knew it was going to be, and I couldn't believe that it was come as any surprise. And that is, it's gone up for pre-order, and in the pre-order it says there is a physical media release of it, but you won't be getting a disc. It will be a download code. Well, why is that any surprise? We've been going this way for such a long time now. No idea the size of this particular game when it comes out, but it's bound sure to be huge. And it makes perfect sense from their point of view that they control who buys it and who you're going to be selling it on to, because every time you sell it on, they get nothing. No money whatsoever. So, of course, the AAA companies, they will always try to go down the route where they get maximum profit out of you. And I just find it strange that people want to have empty cases on their shelves with just a slip of paper in there with a code that in 20 years' time, that code won't mean a thing. It is a sad, sad day. And this is where I'm saying this is all the things that are wrong about gaming in my eyes. So, you know, there's nothing else to say in regards to that. Then chronologically gaming, just to end on a high, he's still in 1982, but he showed off an arcade game that came out at the end of 1982 called Azorian Attack, and quite enjoyed my time looking at that particular game, because I don't think I'd ever seen that one. Moving on to what else I watched on YouTube, there was one called Nostalgia Nerd. That was just in the last day or so. It was about the Atari Lynx story. If anybody knows about the Atari Lynx, I was always intrigued about the story of the Atari Lynx because of its heritage with the Amiga, to be quite honest. It was designed by Epix, picked up by Atari because Epix ran out of development money. And its similarity in its hardware to the Amiga is based on Blitter and the processor and the graphic chip that's inside there. But it came out with 2 iterations throughout its life cycle, and you know the doors open into which one was the best one, the Atari Lynx or the Atari Lynx 2. The Atari Lynx 2 at least were caught on more than the first one. But you could never do anything about the battery life. It's a backlit coloured display with the hardware that was not power efficient. So of course the winner was Nintendo, and that will never be, you know, that will never change. And you can easily see why. And the pricing, you know, it was a very expensive product back in the day, and even when it was cheaper, it was still beyond what Nintendo was selling. So the Nostalgia Nerd had a great story with the Atari Lynx. Then there was Man vs. Film. This interested me because it was the announcements of what Arrow Distribution are bringing out in September. I always like these videos because they sort of like tell me what I might be missing, but also what I might want to pre-order. And there's a lot of good ones in here. There's Forbidden Planet and Misery. Those are 2 films that would be definitely on my, I want to have those in my 4K collection. So that was quite good. Then I saw an old video on a channel called Just Doctor Who. That's what it's called. And it was a series called Draw My Life. And this one in particular was Peter Capaldi. Now, anybody that knows a little bit from previous interviews with Peter Capaldi will tell you that he did animation back in the day. He worked for the BBC as well and did short animations and animations for commercials. And so he used to like drawing Doctor Who, you know, the famous actors, like caricatures. And he did in the whole of this video, he did a caricature of William Hartnell, Patrick Troughton, John Pertwee, Tom Baker. And they were great. You want to see them. He really is a talented guy. So that was brilliant. And then there was a channel to end this called Crabapple. And this brought back many memories. The actual video was called BBC Two's Horror Double Bill, a documentary. And I remember BBC Two bringing out their horror double bills. They were generally on a Friday. They started off generally at about 10:30, went on till about 1 or so in the morning. The double bill would always be a old black and white 60s or 50s horror, along with a more modern, maybe Hammer one. So apparently BBC Two have unearthed another double bill in its entirety, and this guy's done a documentary about it, and it was really good because it brought back those memories of me staying up with my and watching films with my mum. So that was great. So that's that out the way, and we move to film, TV, and soundtrack YouTube. Okay, and the very top one on here is Ian Hill, The Ramblings, who I've talked about already earlier on. His channel is amazing, really. I really do enjoy it. Not only, you know, do I do a live with him, but it's just the amount of stuff that comes out. I mean, my God, this man just does not sort of like pause. You know what I mean? So this week, he's done top 5 action adventure shorts, 1961 to 68. Doctor Who review of The Abominable Snowmen, X-Files review of Season 6, Episode 17, What I Watched This Week, Episode 24, 7-question movie challenge, which is a sort of like a community question thing that's going around at the moment, and then Live With Me on Wednesday, which was Episode 113. So absolutely amazing. Gobsmacked at just how much stuff there, and it's all quality stuff. Please. It'll be in the description. Go and have a little look. Fantastic, as are many of these that I'm reading out at the moment. So the next one I watched this week was Movie Collector. He attended the 67th BFCC Magic of Movies. It's a sort of like a film event that's held every year or two. Projectionists meet there. They show a film. There's lots of stalls where you can buy films on reels. Projector parts, all that sort of stuff, but it's a celebration of movies. What's there not to like? I wish it would have been closer. I'd go, absolutely. Fantastic to watch, definitely recommend that. Then there's Just Joshings, who did a short on his review of Disclosure Day, which came out last week. Steven Spielberg, I mentioned that in the Commode section of last week. Commode and Mayo's take, should I say. So that's interesting if you want to hear what Just Joshings has got to say about that. Then you got Blue Roy Movies, who I've started to get to watch based on the recommendations of Ian Hill and Muckman. He did What Has Roy Been Watching This Week, and 7-question movie challenge, which you heard about earlier with Ian Hill. Absolutely marvellous. Nice to see and hear what this person's 7 answers would be. Then we got Mugman Movies himself. He did his June 2026 movie pickups, because we're at the end of June now, so that was timely. Mondo Chelovic Movies, who I watch. He's absolutely brilliant. Everything I want to know about horror, I go to him generally to watch. He did the 4K releases from Imprint Films. Imprint is a great label. It's just I always find them very expensive, so it's just nice to watch his videos to see what I'm missing, really. But there's some great stuff there. And I mentioned these team already, Commode and Mayo. That's Simon Mayo, and Commode is basically the film reviewer. They did reviews this week of Jackass Best and Last, A Private Life, 500 miles, and the box office top 10 to round it all up, which is what he did this week. I'm surprised Supergirl wasn't there, but it might be because that only came out Wednesday, Thursday, and it all depends on when they record their podcast. And finally, we get to gaming and tech YouTube, which is generally my friends that are part of my Discord, my friends' Discords. I speak to them outside of just YouTube. And the first one we have on there is Down the Rabbit Hole, who I mentioned earlier because he left a comment for me. He did a video on the Vancouver Retro Gaming Expo, which he mentioned it already in his comment. And of course, he also did a video of the Vancouver Retro Gaming Expo pickups because he bought some games, which he also mentioned in his comments. So both of those I actually watched this week. So it came as no surprise what he was actually putting, but very interesting question that he posed to me, and absolutely marvelous videos to watch as well. I should think it's not going to be too far away before we get another OB Windows video, which always make me smile as well. Then we've got Robert's Retro Gaming, and as I say, Canadian royalty, just like Down the Rabbit Hole. The guy just doesn't know where to stop when it comes to his gaming. This week alone, he's done Dwarf Fortress Classic episode 43, Minecraft Play episode 199, where he even speculated himself, what is he going to do for the 200th episode? Pico 8 gameplay of Tetris, Commodore 64 gameplay of a game called Zolix, SNES gameplay of a game called Terra Nagima, I think it's called, and Atari 8-bit gameplay of Steve Davis Snooker, Wormy, and Pacific Coast Highway, which was a Frogger clone. All in all, wonderful week this week from Robert. I really enjoyed my time. Fantastic. Moving on to Steve Still Plays Games. He did C64's Bounty Bob Strikes Back, which is an absolute ultimate classic game and favourite of mine. So that was great. And he did Dark Souls Part 24. He hadn't been doing a few Dark Souls videos. It was about time it was coming out. So he finally did a Part 24, which is there for you to watch right now. Fantastic. Descriptions to many of these channels are in my own blog description, diary description. Then we've got Colin Jones, aka Ponder. Didn't really do a video this week. He put a stake sort of like placeholder down for the Mainmeister High Score Season 19 Game Choice selection. But I do believe he is doing his blog, his Vblog tomorrow. So that will always be a joy to look out for. 20th Salute, my friend. 20th Century Gaming did a Commodore 64 Battle of the Zap Sizzlers Round 3, and we had a great time last night waiting for the English football to come on, and we watched him play Frust, Gribbly's Day Out. What else did he do? Frust, Gribbly's Day Out. Can't think what the other one was. Amazing. You'll have to go and watch now. That's raised the excitement level. You can go and have a little look and see what he was going to be playing. And then, of course, there's my mate, Mainmeister, who did a live, splendid Amiga Classic stream on Sunday. And, of course, he usually does a Friday waffle, but it was due to my unavailability that stopped him from doing a Friday waffle. So if you need to blame anybody, it'd be me. That will be coming up as soon as we can. It was because my mother, really, that I just didn't have the time to actually put to what he was requesting. And that's the end of the paperwork side of the blog. I need to show you sort of what's turned up this week. So I'll just put this into overhead cam mode. There we go. And these didn't come this week, but this one is one that I was so glad that I looked at. Because I was talking so much about Ray Charles. I found my old copy of the film Ray, which has Jamie Foxx as Ray Charles in it. It's an absolutely fantastic film. This is the 4K release with slipcover. Absolutely brilliant. you've got the Blu-ray and the 4K in here. You get the same on the inside as you get as the slip cover. And of course it's region unlocked if you wanted the 4K, so there'll be no multi-region. It's from Kino Lorber, should I say. So that was fantastic. And the 2 steelbooks that turned up, the first one is Labyrinth. It's celebrating its 40th anniversary. Lovely looking steelbook. Look at that. Really nice. Fantastic. And then we've also got, because I ordered that, the Dark Crystal. Now installed in 4K, another puppetry Jim Henson production. Lovely looking steelbook. I remember the Dark Crystal more than Labyrinth. To be, if I was to, you know, really think about it, although both are from my childhood and I enjoyed them. And that's your lot. Other than for me to say thank you so much for listening along to my diary. Always a pleasure and a joy. I'm hopefully now going to watch a little bit of the Formula One, what's left, and look forward to next week. And I hope it's a better week weather-wise, or should I say heat-wise. Never really that worried about rain or any of that sort of stuff, but my garden definitely could do with a bit of water. And with that bombshell, I'm going to say salute. Thank you so much, and hope you've enjoyed this. Please, if you can, like, subscribe, all that sort of stuff. Not that I've ever really said that at the end. I don't know. I'm waffling on a little bit now. So, salute. Bye-bye.